Yeah.
It's
I
almost
mean,
like you do something.
it's almost like I have a job and I actually work for a living, you know. Well, I don't work here for a living, but I work here for fun, but that's a story for another day. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
So, just to kick this off real quick, um, eh, what did you think about, the whole contract purity thing? Being able to, so we want to prevent basically two different services from consuming a contract. Sorry, we want to prevent a service from consuming two different contracts because that's literally the definition of, spaghetti code. So if I were to visualize this, just so you guys understand, when I try to say, okay, here's the, let's see here. This is not necessarily an easy problem to solve, but it's a problem to think about. And, I do have a preliminary solution, but we still need to think about it and see, if we can come up with something. So here's my screen. Let's see here. Da, da, da. Okay, so let's just say, let's put this in here. So assume that you have two different services, right? You have a student student service and you have a library card service. Okay. And these two services happen to be a part of a, let's say a student registration, flow where students needs to register to a school, and as soon as they register in that very school, we need to create a library card for them. What some folks would say, they would go and say, oh, that's easy then. Have an orchestration service to go create a student and then take that model. Let's just say this is student registration orchestration service, right? And this service would basically go create the student. And then, Paul, are you talking to us?
No, sorry
Okay,
guys.
okay, you're
I
fine.
had a bit
Okay.
of a disaster at work.
Firefighting? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
firefighting.
Okay. All right, I'll leave you be. So anyway, so you have the student service returning that student model, right? But we also don't want to go and pass that student model to, let's say this is your student model. We don't want to pass that guy down here to create a library card. Instead, we want to pass a primitive, type reference. So instead of passing the student, you pass a student ID, right? And that ID would be a GUID or an integer or a string, whatever your student is, and this way your library card will not be tightly coupled or attached to a contract from another service in any way, shape, or form. Who's doing that work? The orchestration service, right? So let's take that to our OData problem that we have. We have first, before I jump back to this part, do you guys have any questions about that? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah,
Now
I
that
was
you've
thinking.
explained it, I know what you mean now.
I thought, when I watched the last session, I basically said to myself, okay, I was literally, so my wife always tells me this. She says sometimes you're saying things assuming that people have the background, like in your head. You're assuming because you know it, then other people must know it too, right? That's not necessarily true, So this is basically I kind of thought, okay, let me roll back. I've been thinking about, our last session. I was like, I throw a problem at these folks, and I was like, yeah, deal with it, and go ahead and think about a solution. But I have to explain why. Again, remember, this is very standard compliant project, so I have to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Anyway. So do you understand now? Like, we'll see a lot of people go and say, "Oh, there's absolutely nothing wrong with passing in a contract and spitting out a completely different contract." And that's literally how you start a disastrous project, right? You start kind of, the models start getting kind of hooked up together. That's the whole point of having an orchestration service, to kind of abstract away that stuff. Your orchestration service might internally know about multiple contracts, but it never exposes more than just one, right? Like for instance, your student registration orchestration service might pull in might receive a request, let's say a student registration request. It's still returning a student registration request. Maybe it will flip the status and say completed, pending, whatever the case may be. But underneath, it's going and creating a student and creating a library card. You understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So we want to apply that to our OData Neo projects, right? We want to go and say, I want to allow the. Do you guys know if my voice is coming through the camera or through the mic?
I think
It
it's coming through the
sounds
mic.
okay. I can't tell which one. Hold your hand over the mic and talk.
So if I step over here, can you still hear me at the exact same quality?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go back to this because sometimes it was doing that and it was really, really yikes. Anyway, so in OData, what we want to do, we want to basically go and say, okay, this is your situation here, right? And we have a tokenization service, right? And we have a projection service, right? And this tokenization and projection service, basically something is tying them up together. And for this thing that's tying them up together, okay, we agreed that this guy is going to spit out an array of tokens and it receives a primitive type, which is a string, and that's okay. Primitive types are allowed because they exist everywhere and they cause no coupling or dependency in any way, shape, or form. When when I get really, really rich and I have time to rewrite the .NET framework, we will talk about, why these primitive types are also a bad idea, but that's a story for another day. So let's just pick up. So this guy is returning a token. I can't pass the token down here because that basically creates,
It
coupling.
loses boundary. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are two options that we have. Either we make the contract common between these two services, which is okay. We could do that. And have one service kind of play around with the type of the model. So it's basically going and saying, okay, this one service determined that we have words and separators, but this second service is going to have um, I don't know, it's going to have some sort of a different type. So instead of word, it's going to say an operand or an operator or a parameter, whatever you want to call it. And the separators are going to be equals and, not equals and assignments and whatever we want to call it. This is one route. The other route is to let the orchestration service take these tokens and completely convert them into a completely different contract. And this different contract is going to have to be something that basically still maintains certain values from the previous tokens and turns it into projected token or something like that. We also have that option. We could have other options, but I don't know what they are. So you're gonna have to help me out there.
So, one of the things that comes to mind when considering one of these options or the other would be: do we anticipate the contract for a token changing? So the circle there. If we don't anticipate it changing, then we can move it out to a library and consider that thing to be done and not touch it again. If we do that, that's fine. If we anticipate that thing changing, then I don't want to share it yet.
So when you say anticipate that contract changing, you mean by our consumers, the people that will be utilizing the library, right?
Even internally, once you share it, that contract kind of needs to become constant. Like then you have to worry about versioning and stuff like that. If that's constant and that structure, the shape of that data doesn't change,
Mm.
then it can be shared. Like, do we
See,
plan on adding another property to the tokenization token? If we don't,
You mean the projection token?
um, yeah, either way, if we anticipate adding or modifying our concept of token for either tokenization or projection, I don't think we should share it because we're
Mm.
talking about, um, yeah, that's basically it. If we don't modify it any more than what it is, we can
Mm.
share it as an output for tokenization service and an input for projection service, and that's its life. That it's never going to progress anywhere past that, and it's set in stone. As long as
It's
that's the case, then we can share it. If it's not the case, then we come up with something else, which is most likely kind of like how we treat PTOs. You basically just translate one to the other.
How do you feel about a service that's changing the details of or the values of the contract underneath without changing the contract itself? There's something that really sucks about that, something that doesn't sound right because i- what what I'm thinking is that, um,
So, Hassan, one idea I had following
mm,
the end of our last stream
mhm,
was if it's important that we stick to primitives in and out down the pipeline as much as we can,
mhm.
then we accept an OData string. Why can't we output a token string from the tokenization service
What's
and
that
then
look
take
like?
that? Well, if you think about what a token really is, it's just key value pairs, right? So,
So you want to produce it as a key value pair.
of
That's not a
sorts, yeah.
that's not a bad idea, Paul.
And thinking of it as like something, my initial thought was a dictionary, but then I thought, no, you've got duplicate keys. So it's more of a hash set or a list of key value pairs. And that's a really kind of key
Is a
value
list
pairs is
primitive?
a list, probably, well, you could use an array.
It's native, but it's not primitive. Like it's in the
Yeah.
framework, but it's not primitive. Primitive
Yeah.
is like your very basic string integer boolean. You names it, you know, um, it's not too bad. Like, primitive values, if you're passing in a list, we shoot lists around all the time.
Mm.
Maybe an array just to be sort of primitive, you know, an array of what? An array of key value pairs, right? Like a
Yeah.
tuple?
Yeah, and this is what got me questioning, and some of the questions that I dropped to Joe and on the chat after our last session was kind of like, what what's considered primitive at this point? Are we talking about like a thing in memory, like a raw single value, or are we talking about like a struct, or are we talking about just something that has no structure, which is just a raw value, like a string or an integer?
Okay, I can explain. There are three types of contracts, right? There's primitive contracts, right, which is string, boolean, integer. There is native contracts, which are the things that the framework is giving you, like, a tuple and a list and an IEnumerable and all that fun stuff. And then there is, a local contracts, which is basically they all live under the custom contracts. So you basically have a token and something that simplifies something in real life. There's also external contracts when you pull in a third party component or you're calling an API, and it's dictating certain values. So these three that so there are big three categories, right? There's primitive, local. Ideally, I used to I used to treat primitive contracts and native contracts the same thing. Like I used to go and say, here is in this category here you have primitives and you have natives because pretty much like they're kind of the same thing if you look at it from the perspective of, kind of low level architecture. You're going and saying, I don't care, as long as it's available across the board in any software that's going to be built within that ecosystem, it's going to be always be there, right? So you have local in here and you have external, and both of these are customized, contracts that we don't own, right? Like you can't share them across. These are okay. I'm going and saying, okay, let me call it. I'm okay with that. Sharing that across multiple entities is okay. Sharing this one beyond the foundation service is not okay. Does that make sense? Like if a processing service is still working with an external contract, like HTTP unauthorized exception that's coming from some third-party library, that's a violation of the standard. We can't do it.
So O tokens are local, right?
O tokens are local contracts, yes,
But it's not okay to share those between
across multiple
services.
services. Yeah, because remember, it's actually truly autonomous. Like it's truly independent. right? And that's not an easy problem to solve, but it's a problem worth solving, Paul. I think where
Do
you're
you end up with a problem where, like, you output a local model from one service, then you need another local model, a different one, for the contract on another service? And so what you end up doing is just translating for the sake of decoupling things, when in actual fact, what you're trying to decouple is two things that are already in the same library. So what are you gaining from that? I mean, I
So
realize that in like the absolute best case scenario, everything would be absolutely decoupled. But in a
Mhm.
programming world, we often have some middle grounds where we say, actually, we don't want to completely decouple this for the net benefit of having, say, some performance gains. You know, my concern here is we're going to get to the end of the pipeline, and we've done so many memory allocations and things along the way
It
that
doesn't matter at
there's
this
no
point.
performance to it.
That's a pre-optimization. We don't care.
All right, fair enough.
At best your worst query is gonna be 500 characters, so 500 tokens in the .NET world or any world actually. It's nothing. Unless you're working with assembly and C and still working with a 32 kilobit memory software, which is still a real thing, but irrelevant in this case. You're in a high level object-oriented programming world. Memory is for free. Everyone has it. And it's
Yeah,
pre-optimization, like
it
we don't have
wasn't
it
so
yet.
much. It wasn't so much that. It was more. I was thinking, kind of like I would think if I was building .NET itself, or if I was building ASP.NET, right? Where,
Mhm.
like, you want to optimize the framework because the thing that's sat on top of it could be a heavyweight problem, and if you're incurring overheads on that, then you're transferring your technical debt essentially
We
into
don't
their domain.
still we don't have that problem yet.
Okay.
So it's not a concern. I'd rather have my code be readable and simple and then worry about optimization later than optimize a code that is hard to understand, right?
Yeah,
Because
that's fair. That's
anyway,
fair. I would agree.
yeah. So I think you're not far off. I think you just kind of inspired a very interesting idea now. Um,
So yeah,
what
the question was: is a tuple a primitive? Really, I guess in
It's
some
not
form.
primitive, but it's native to the framework.
Yeah. So can we get away with that?
Right. You can get away with that until someone decides that they want to convert your library into Java and Swift and stuff like that, and then they start crying. Because the
Yeah.
decoupling, when you decouple on the primitive level, you're cross-platform, cross-programming languages. When you decouple on the native level, you're basically saying, look at me, I am a .NET guy, we have all the cool stuff, and everyone else sucks, right? Which is not what we want to kind of communicate.
So yeah, so that's what got me into the territory of arrays, right? So if you had
Right.
arrays of arrays, you could literally transmit all of this data as just arrays of string arrays. Because you can have a string array that represents a key value pair, and then you can wrap that up in an array that represents an array of string arrays, and that's how you transfer your tokens. But at that point, you lose some readability of your code. And so you've
If you
decoupled and you're effectively using primitives,
but
although an
but
array
but
isn't
your
really a
readability
primitive.
suffers.
Yeah, exactly. But pretty much every framework, every programming language at some level understands arrays, right? So it makes it really easy to translate. The problem is, like you say, you lose your readability. So there's got to be a middle ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that example is very similar to making all your variables strings because they can accept integers and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I
So
thought,
you
okay,
lose
let's.
your shape of your data.
Yeah.
Which,
So
which,
I went one step further and went, okay, let's retain some shape, but give a little on some of the other points that we were making by using something like key value pairs. Because pretty much every framework I've ever dealt with has an understanding of dictionaries and hash sets and things like that, where key value pairs are a thing. So it's not like it would be difficult to translate, but you also retain some readability essentially.
what do you think about an array of dynamics?
Every time I mention dynamic to literally anyone, I get screamed at. I mean, there's a load of stuff that I do,
Because
for
it's .NET
example.
specific. Sorry, it's
Yeah.
C# specific.
So I do a lot of stuff like in my workflow engine where I take unstructured data and I just pass it as a dynamic object, and then I work with that to translate it into something that's not dynamic. And I think that's a perfectly good case for it. But I don't know if using dynamic deliberately is a good thing. Don't know.
That's the thing. You're in a strongly typed world. There is a reason why, strongly typed programmers hate JavaScript programmers to an extent, because some folks say we never know what the type is until it comes from the other side. We don't know what it is. It could be a potato or it could be a goat. I don't know. It could be any, as long as this is JavaScript for you. As long as it fits the tube that you created for it, then it goes. It could be milk, it could be honey, and it could be poison. Totally fine. It fits the tube, let it go. So I don't know what to say to that, but um, in all honesty, maybe dynamic is a little bit extreme. Maybe we can think
You
Does
run into
dynamic
the same
have
problem. You lose something that we can actually say this is the contract. Like when you say dynamic, you're like, put anything you want there.
and
It's
we
the same
can
thing as saying, hey, put everything in arrays of arrays or put everything into a string.
right
You
or a
can't
list of a
share
tube
that with
thing.
anyone else and have it be anything meaningful. I think after having this conversation with everyone, it's probably just simpler to make a new contract and then map from one to the other.
Then that would be something we would want to do then. And you know,
Especially considering that each of these service could be a process boundary or service boundary or something like that. It's going to end up getting translated anyways.
so let's talk about that for a second. Like if I go and say here is your um if I go here and say here is your let's call it projected token for now. Okay, a projected token will have something like, initial value or raw value, right? And it might have a a token type, which is a word or a separator, right? And underneath that, you will have a projection, which is either unidentified, which is what the orchestration service is going to say. It says, I don't know what this is yet. This is why I'm sending it over to you. Or it can be anything else like, operand, operator, whatever the type may be that we want to work with. This is what we're going to give to the O node service to kind of build the tree off of it. And then that's
that
it.
question?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Why not build O nodes from the outset? Like a flat list of O nodes with just a type and a value on them. And then
Dude, have you watched the first few You were there. You haven't watched it. You
no,
were
no,
there.
no, 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 no. I'm saying do the logic that we're currently doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we say create a new O token, create a new O node and put its type and its value into it. Don't hierarchy it. Don't make it into a tree or anything. Just a flat list.
Yeah,
Then when
that's
you project it,
mhm.
improve the detail on there, and then when we O node it, we add the hierarchy
that's
by
that's
linking
what
them.
that's what I said originally. I said we could have one contract shared across multiple services.
Yeah.
Yeah, but originally when we discussed this, we were like, oh, tokenization is getting too OData-y. It can't know about this stuff. So now we're going full circle again. We did all this for you.
Well,
Paul, this solution is okay. Why do you hate it so much? Why are you a hater?
I'm not hating on it. I'm saying, like, hey, if you wanted a single contract across all services, that's how you would achieve it, right? You'd have this hierarchical object, but the tokenization piece wouldn't know about hierarchy. It would just build a flat list, assuming that an O node is a flat object, essentially, because that's all it knows.
You have to be careful what you also trade off when you share a contract across multiple services. You're creating, you know, it's not
It's
It's
a
a single point of
dependency,
failure.
and
it's
you got
not
to
it,
manage it.
it's
It's a dependency and it's a single point of failure. If one of those things needs that thing to change, then all three are going to be affected.
you're killing all your services and you're creating coupling that's unnecessary just because you don't want
Yeah.
to create a new contract.
Yeah.
Hold, this is okay. This contract might be okay.
The one
Okay.
that you just made, the only argument I have with it is you're adding a property or that projection thing that the original tokenization service doesn't need. So you've added it for something down the road.
Yeah, yeah, this model is going to be constructed originally here and passed down here. So it's going to be constructed in this guy, and then it gets passed down to this guy. I'm using the colors intentionally for,
Oh, okay. So you're proposing a new model, not a shared model.
yes.
Okay. That's okay.
So this guy is going to spit out tokens. This guy will take these tokens and turn them into projections. And then it will send it back to this guy. This way, these services have absolutely no idea about each other. And the orchestration service is doing exactly what it's meant to do, which is basically, delegate the work instead of doing the work. The orchestration service is like a translator. Imagine that you're speaking to someone that has a different language. You know how two presidents or kings or princes sitting next to each other, and there's always that person in the middle that's translating the language, right? That's what the orchestrator is. It respects the contract or the language of every service per se. That's the whole idea of it. What do you have to say about that?
See, my thinking is that everything behind the orchestration service is completely internal and always will be.
Yes. This is how you can go and say, hey, I am sending you something, and whatever happens underneath is completely outside. Your unit test knows about this, but your consumer will never do. All your consumer knows is that they're sending you a query, and you're doing some magic underneath in an abstract fashion. And this magic underneath is what's the Sam, come over here to the office. Why are you home?
No, I'm in Studio A.
Come over here.
Which room?
Studio C, neighborhood. Where am I? I don't know what's my location. Come to Studio C and
Give me the room number.
I'll send you the room number, okay? Ali, what's our room number? What do
Hold on, you are in the open office.
Yeah, come over.
I'm a private office.
See if, okay, so I'm sending it to you in a message and then,
Okay.
no, I want him to come here because
Problem is there's no number posted here, so he'll find 4019 really easily.
okay, find 4019.
He's gone.
Oh, what is it?
4233.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ali. Appreciate it. Okay. Ali is cool. I like Ali. Anyway, so let me go back to this part. I think this might work. I think having an orchestration service that basically allows us to. He should be here in a second. Studio is over there. I think if we make it this way, we might have a chance in your consumer really has no idea what's happening underneath, and they shouldn't. The real problem that we're gonna face later, what did he say? 4390. What did you say, brother? 4390 what? 4333. Thank you.
4033, wasn't it?
42.
42.
So anyway, I don't know where I'm at. That's how much of a dude I am. So
Yeah, so
anyway,
last week when we were talking about cul-de-sacs, my thinking was that your orchestration service here would call into the tokenization service
mhm,
that would be dependent on a projection service that
mhm.
would be dependent on some node service. The
No,
net
no, we
result.
shouldn't do that, Paul. I'm
Oh,
changing.
okay.
Ideally, this orchestration service will be replaced by the lake house.
Right. So you literally want these things completely separated
Completely
from
separate.
not as a sort of single chain that
Yeah.
produces an O node.
The chain, you're not wrong about the chain. The chain was just to describe the stages but not necessarily the architecture that represents these stages. That's my bad. I should have said that earlier.
Okay.
Like if I go and say, okay, the pizza gets, you get the dough and then you have the toppings and then you put it in the oven. None of these people need to know about each other, right?
So you could add to the diagram that you've got here your own node service as a third dependency of your orchestration service, and
Yes.
that's the model that you're having.
Yes. So
Okay.
far. So far. This is a really important piece. This is because this is a living organism that changes as we learn. This is a beauty about software architecture. You're changing and you're learning and evolving without having to worry about. Again, one thing I noticed the most, with how some people might work, they say like, if I write it once, it's never going to change.
Good
That's
luck with
so
that.
wrong. That's so wrong. And if you build it with that mindset, you will be forced to change eventually. But when you do, you already designed your system in a way that is not rewritable and changeable. And therefore, things become really difficult. So this is the kind
Have
of
you ever
mentality.
have you ever written a block of code where you've gotten halfway through it and somebody said, "Oh, we need to change it"?
Uh-huh.
Like, I've never had a situation where that hasn't happened. Like, there's always some guy in the business that's like, yeah, but when the wind direction is easterly and there's a chicken in the garden, you need to do this instead.
Uh,
There's always that gotcha. Like, there's some kid in the corner that's like, yeah, but.
yeah, I know. I don't know, like, to be honest with you, like, anyway, let me put this here for a second. Sorry, my Oh, node service. I don't think we're gonna call it node service. We're gonna need to find a name for it. You know, ideally, normally, I really like that my service has the exact same name as the contract that it's working with. It's part of the readability. If I'm sending you students, then I expect it's a student service, at least at the foundation processing level, at least. You know what I mean? Although that I've run in recently into a situation where your processing service has its completely own contract and it's playing a converter underneath for a foundation service. But that's very rare. That's really, really rare.
Yeah,
And
Ash has
I'm
something like
and
that.
I'm still not very sold on it. That's the thing about standardization. The more and more projects you work in, the more and more you're going to be exposed to scenarios where you're going to have to think about these problems. This is high level advanced engineering problems that we're trying to solve. So you're not writing hello world anymore. You're actually trying to solve something a little bit higher than that. And I think it will be our path to evolve into even more realms that will make what we're talking about today, including cul-de-sac and all this standardization stuff. It's just a stepping stone into a more advanced, way of expressing thoughts and, reflecting thoughts in code and stuff like that through design and architecture. Um, I mean, other than just, taking more time to just think about this, can you guys see any potential problems with this? Anything at all?
No, I mean, you've pointed out that the premature optimization thing is probably a bad idea. So that's the only real kind of concern I had. But yeah, I can see the reasons for it, to be
I
honest. So
also I also don't want to put future engineers in a spot where I don't want to program other people into a corner. So now we're don't try not to program ourselves into a corner. I don't want to program other people into a corner. So I don't want to go and say, hey, this is the rule, and even if you try to optimize, you will violate the standard, and now you're not able to make it work faster. So now they have two layers of problems to solve. Just something to think about, right? How often do you think about the next guy that's going to come in and try to actually rewrite your software, right? There's something about engineers' ego where they go and say, "Don't ever touch my software. It's perfect the way it is," right? I'm changing that. I'm flipping that pyramid a little bit. I'm going and saying, "No, I'm going to write it in a way that makes it so easy for you to go and just rewrite the whole thing." Right? Eventually, some engineers, maybe at NASA or something, they will come in and say, I don't want this projection service. It doesn't work for me. I want to add something else. And that's why we're thinking about the lake house and all that kind of good stuff. Okay, let's go back to this model because this is the hardest part. Do you have any objections about this model in any way, shape, or form?
Why do we not just update the token type in the projection?
The token
That has
model?
fixed values.
So I'm just confused as to why we need 3 values in a projected token as opposed to 2. Oh, is that just to retain the previous?
We want to be able to revert. Remember, we want to be. It's a two-way street, right?
Right.
The people, there will be people that will give you an expression until you give me the raw query because I want to send it over the wire to a RESTful API.
So this will be a pattern going forward then. So ONodes will retain potentially the original token type and the projection type, and then the value.
Except for the edge services, and by that I mean the edge service, which is whatever sitting behind ONode to turn it into GraphQL or Expression or SQL. It won't retain anything because it's going back to being a primitive or native model. And the primitive or native model doesn't have that room for us to return the original value. So somehow you're going to have to reconstruct from there. We could also go and say, hey, don't retain anything. As long as you're going to, it's lossy, right? It's a lossy process. You're going to lose it anyway, somewhere downstream. When you convert all the way back to a raw query, or you go all the way down to an expression, neither the expression nor the raw query will have the original node value in it. So it's lossy. We'll lose that data. We'll lose that information. It might be helpful to sitting in between these services, but once you reach to the outside world, it's over.
Yeah, I guess it's, if you want these things to be two-way, the orchestration service is doing a conversion between contracts, right?
Yeah.
So would it also have to do the reverse conversion between contracts?
At some point, yes. This is just a
So
one-way street. There's the way back as well.
so with your projection model, do we need a third value, or do we just put the value from the first stage into?
What would that third value be? The original expression?
Oh, well, it's again, it's key value pairs, right? They're
Yeah,
just going to be different key value pairs when they come back out.
right,
So we give it key value pairs in, and we get key value pairs out. Essentially,
right.
that's what a projected token is. It's basically the same as an O token, but
We
we're
also
going to
don't
call it
need to
something
use the
else.
same model that we pass in as our result either.
Yeah, I mean, I would be in favor of Hassan's idea of, like, so we've got, a tokenization token, and then we've got a projection token. So they're separate things, but you could literally just copy from tokenization token arrays into a projected token to do that translation. But then the projection service can then update the types of the projection tokens internally and then just return that same array, essentially, is what I'm thinking.
Mm.
Because if essentially we don't, if you're saying it's like going to be a lossy conversion anyway going forward, then
Why
why
bother?
add the extra? Yeah, why add the extra overhead of carrying all that bloat around if you're just going to throw it away anyway at some point?
Well, there's a couple of things. Hey, Claw. There's a couple of things. You need this part here in your projection service to know which subcategory of a token this needs to be. And I think that's okay. The one that you would argue about is this guy. Why do you need this guy? You don't. Actually, you do. You still need that raw value to do a little bit more, categorization.
Yeah, it was the contrary. It was the projection one that I was kind of
Hmm.
questioning. It was like, do you need that guy? I don't think you do.
Oh, you mean this guy here, the guy in green? This guy here?
Yeah, because my thinking was that all you're going to do is you're going to run your logic on token types, basically, by looking at the raw value and saying, the new type should be my projected value.
Well, it will update that contract. Like your orchestration service is sending a list of projected tokens down, and it's updating that contract from unidentified, unprocessable, sorry, not processed to whatever the value is.
Okay. Yeah.
This is a very important decision. I hope that we're on the same page.
I'm happy to go with it.
Come here.
Because,
What up, Sam?
Is that Sam?
How are you doing? So
Hey,
let
Sam.
me. I know it's a weird neighborhood. I know. I'm sorry. Ali, this is Sam. He's my friend. I like him a lot.
Being Hassan's friend.
Yep. Ali's telling him condolences for being Hassan's friend.
This is your new office?
Yeah. Can you
New
guys?
team?
Yeah. Can you guys still hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, let me increase the sound here a little bit. Okay.
Hey, Sam. How's it going?
Paul is asking you, how are you doing?
Just finished my dentist appointment.
He just came from a dentist appointment, so he's so Sam, here's what we're talking about. So
Charlie moved my.
this is we're gonna eat food together today, right?
Maybe.
Okay. So Sam, this is what we were talking about. Let me visualize this here. Let me bring this a little. I need to get you one of these 49-inch monitors. Okay, so here's what we're saying, brother. Like we're sending. Remember the tokenization service, right? So we're basically going and saying we're bringing tokens from this service. An orchestration service will turn them into projected tokens and then shoot it down to projection service. And the projection service will basically try to turn the projection type from word or separator into either, operand, operator, equal value, whatever the case may be. What do you think?
Cool.
See, that's why he's my friend. Right there, case in point. He's like, okay, let's do it. So, just so you guys understand, Sam's model is like move in any direction and let's learn things and adjust as we go. Which I really appreciate. So this is what we're gonna do, Sam. We're gonna build this projection service here, and this projection service is gonna take this array of tokens. Sorry, it's gonna take an array of projected tokens and then try to identify as what they are.
Take the array of project token.
Yeah. So this tokenization service is shooting out tokens, right? This orchestration service will turn them into initial projected tokens and then shoot it back to this guy. So there's mapping that's happening here between tokens and projected tokens.
Okay.
Cool.
I like the school. Oh.
That's my brother right there. See what I'm saying? Sam is a little bit, his teeth is still hurt from the dentist, but we got it. Yeah. So that means you're not going to be able to eat lunch today?
Yeah, so maybe we can make an appointment.
Maybe soup like noodles in the comments.
Don't tell Paul.
Don't tell Paul. Okay, we're not going to tell Paul anything. Paul, we're not going to tell you the truth.
I'll make sure he doesn't know, all right?
All right, guys. And then I think the next step for us is just to go build that projection service we're not going to build the orchestration service yet. We're just going to build the projection service next session. And we will just go ahead and assume that the incoming is all unidentified. And then it comes back from the other side as identified, specific tokens. What do you think about that?
Sounds good.
Why are you all agreeing with me today? That's weird. Why are you all agreeing with me?
So you change your team.
Because I changed the team.
Congratulations for you.
See,
we're trying to let you look hospitable.
Yeah, hospitable and welcomed.
Yeah.
All right. If you don't have any other questions. Paul, are you clear on this? So if there are no questions, I think we
Yeah.
should be good.
Yeah. Let's like Sam says, let's just roll with it and see what comes out, right? And if we end up doing a U-turn or changing things, we end up changing things. But if we don't, great, that's even better, right?
Yeah, we're
And
getting used to that.
And maybe we don't have to end up with a tree. Saying, are you open to solving a solution without having a tree?
You don't have any tree?
Yeah. Do you think it's possible?
I reckon we could do it with a projected token stream.
But it's hard.
If the solution,
Mm.
so getting to a simple solution is actually the hardest thing. And if the solution, I can pick up, some, new in career entry level, someone who just out of college, and I'll bring them in. I'll say, hey, look at this. What does this look like? Right? I mentor a lot of these inside of and outside of Microsoft. I'll be like, hey, does this look good? Is this simple? And if they say it's simple, then we did our job. If it says I have no idea what you're doing, then we're screwed, man. Because that basically means the next generation can't pick up that code and do anything with it. They'll just rewrite it, just blow it all off, right?
They're just going to look at it and they're going to say, Hassan wrote that last week. It's legacy. I don't want to see it.
Yep, that's legacy. That's my definition of legacy code. As soon as it hits master branch, it's legacy. It needs to be updated. All right, peeps. Thank you so much for hanging out today. And for people watching, questions, comments, concerns, drop in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Take care. Sam, let's